Welcome to How to Email Your Professor. I'm Dr. Katie Homar from North Carolina State University Graduate School. Have you ever needed to email a professor but were afraid of messing it up? Maybe you had a question about an assignment in one of your classes, or perhaps you wanted your professor to write you a letter of recommendation for an opportunity such as an internship, fellowship, or job. Fear not. In this tutorial, we present strategies for strong, effective professional emails. We'll review some examples of professional and unprofessional language to use in emails. We specifically focus on the genre of request emails, such as a request for letters of recommendation. Although these can be tricky to write, request emails are an essential part of your graduate career. In this tutorial, we'll present strategies for strengthening each part of a professional email, starting with the greeting and subject line. The subject line and greetings are the doorway to your main message, setting the tone and preparing the reader for what's to come. When crafting a subject line, remember to be specific and precise, but also keep it short. You want to persuade your reader, your professor, to open the message. Which sound like good subject lines for an email to a professor? Let's start with Bob Smith. Specific name, but very unclear subject line. We don't know what the sender's request is. How about request for a letter of recommendation? This is a good subject line. It's short, precise. Your professor knows exactly what you're asking for. What about dissertation chapter 2 draft? Another excellent subject line. Your professor will understand exactly which draft and which writing you want to discuss. What about my grade? This is a really unclear and unprofessional subject line. Note the 2 exclamation points, equally unprofessional as well. And the last one, Chem 2200 absence on November 5th. Another great subject line. This one contains a specific date and course. Your professor will understand the exact nature of your absence. Which sound like good greetings for an email to a professor? Hey. This is really casual, really informal, and not a good idea. After all, you are writing to a specific human being. What about Dear Prof? Sounds kind of formal, right? Prof and all. But again, remember that you're writing to a specific person, to a human being who will read this message. Dear Dr. Lee. That's more like it. Or suppose you're writing to your graduate TA. Dear Ms. Jones. When writing a greeting to your professor, you're probably thinking, what about Dear Jen? Or Dear Doug? Some American professors want to be friendly, approachable, and informal. They prefer that you address them by their first name. But when you write to a professor for the first time, always use the professor's title and last name. So, Dear Dr. Smith. When addressing a professor for the first time, be formal and err on the side of caution. In the main message or body of your email, include a brief introduction. Introducing yourself creates a shared background with your professor. This is especially important if your professor teaches a large class, teaches multiple sections of a class, or if you haven't seen him or her in a while. Here's an example of a professional email by a student whom we'll call Betsy. Notice how Betsy includes brief key details about herself to establish context with her professor. Now for the main message. Here is where you state your request directly but politely. In your request, you want to include enough information for your professor to understand the opportunity that you're applying to, make a decision about whether to write a letter, and submit the letter appropriately. In this section, be sure to include key details, such as a reply date for the professor to respond to you, as well as the deadline for submitting the letter. Also include brief information about the submission itself, such as a website, email contact address, or information about supported file formats. Notice how Betsy includes this information in the body of her email message. She gives this professor enough information to understand the opportunity she's applying to, conference funding, as well as some key deadlines. In a request email, remember to include a follow-up plan. What should both you and your professor do to ensure that this recommendation letter is received? For example, how will you know that the letter has been received? Is there any way to verify this on your end? In Betsy's email, she mentions Rachel Redstone, the grad school's grant coordinator, who will email all applicants once their letters are received. In this section of the requests, it's also a good idea to attach and mention supporting materials, such as a CV, resume, cover letter, or conference abstract. These materials give your recommender enough information and background to write you a strong letter of recommendation. You may have noticed that Betsy includes phrases like, would you please, and if you could write me a letter, in the body of her main message. These verbs, would, could, and might, are called modal verbs. In American English professional writing, modal verbs are one way to soften a request and make it more polite. When emailing your professor, be polite and think would. Be concise. Your email message should be no more than 3 to 4 full paragraphs. Each paragraph should have no more than 2 to 3 sentences. Again, you want to give your reader just enough information to establish background, make a decision, and take action. In this case, writing you a letter of recommendation. In your request email, avoid excessive emotional and personal details. Focus on the professional opportunity at hand. Lastly, end your email message on a strong note. Remember to thank your reader, your professor, for his or her time. Even if your professor is not able to write you a letter of recommendation in this particular situation, it's important to thank him or her for time spent reading your message and to keep the door open for future communications. Remember, too, to end with a polite closer like sincerely or regards, and sign your full name, first name and last name. Now that we've discussed some strategies for effective professional emails, let's turn to a sample email that could use a bit of help. See if you can spot 3 things that this writer should change or strengthen. Obviously, there's a lot going on in this email. From its entitled tone, vague subject line, and lack of greeting, the writer doesn't even bother to introduce herself or provide follow-up details about this fellowship. But I'd like to focus on these 3 other things. First off, note the sender's email address. When writing to a professor, always be sure to use your university email address. It not only helps your reader identify you, but it's more professional as well. solongbabygiggles@hotmail.com. Second, pay attention to the sender's timeline. She wants a letter of recommendation in 1 week. That's impossible. When emailing a professor, be sure to do your homework, plan in advance. Allow your recommender at least 5 to 6 weeks to compose a message and submit it. After all, you want him or her to write you the most persuasive recommendation. Lastly, avoid casual text speak in an email. Hey, what's up, the abbreviation you. And remember, too, to proofread your email message and use spell check before you hit send. Now here's what a revised version of that request email might look like. Notice that the sender sends this from her NC State email address. Notice, too, that the writer begins with a specific, short subject line and a polite greeting to her professor. The writer, too, briefly introduces herself and provides some brief context before stating her request. When emailing a professor, remember to be specific. Be concise. And be polite. Include enough background information and context for your reader to make a decision and take action. And always remember to thank the reader for their time. With these strategies, you can email your professor with confidence and ease and craft more persuasive, effective professional email messages. To learn more about this and to learn about the Graduate School's professional development workshops, visit us at the links below. Thanks for watching.